In 1960 was not the only time that Jacob Lawrence visited Nigeria or the artistic event was happening in the country. The 1960 also saw a very great moment in the United States. That was when African history and African studies, kind of became really very significant in the academy. And today we are very lucky to have in our midst scholars who came out from that generation, who at the time were young grad students who in various ways went back to Nigeria to conduct researches in different fields. But also some of them actually participated in the American Peace Corps volunteer in the 60s. And today we have in our midst three of the numerous of those young people who went to Nigeria at that time to just kind of reflect about the time they had in Nigeria. And first, well, in no particular order, but first, right, on my immediate left is Emeritus Professor Phillip Peake, who was a professor at Drew University in New York. Peake, at the time, first was a Peace Corps volunteer. And after his time as a Peace Corps volunteer from Nigeria, he returned back for his fieldwork when he was studying for a doctorate degree in folklore at the Indiana University. Mind you, Indiana University was that institution that kind of championed this whole new revolution in the study and in the study and intellection of African studies at the time. Second, my left is Emeritus Professor Robin Poyner, who at the time was a grad student studying art history under the tutelage of Roy Sieber, the doyen of African art in the United States. Roy Sieber went ahead to, Robin Poyner went ahead to be an accomplished scholar in Yoruba art and culture, and was my mentor when I came to grad school at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Third, among them is our esteemed professor, Sara Hollis of the Southern University at New Orleans. At the time, Sara Hollis was once a Peace Corps volunteer to Nigeria and Benin City, and then she later did her research around Ovia Ida, who was a very successful Benin sculptor that came out from that era. And then she has gone ahead to, become a professor of museum studies, but also African American art history. So I welcome the three of you this morning to this wonderful program. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So there's not going to be any particular way of us to, we don't have to be very organized. I try for us to be very creative in our conversation this morning. Although I had arranged it to say it is a reflection of what happened in Nigeria, but I don't know if the introduction that I gave was really very succinct enough for the three of you. But if that was enough, I think we'll just jump in to the conversation that we have this morning, which is how did you all see Nigeria when you arrived at that time? Phil and Sarah in the 1960s, and then later in the 70s. But Robin in the 70s when he went to do his research at all.
Well, it was a very exciting time. I think we were very, very lucky to get there in the mid-60s. The excitement of independence, I think, was still in the air, but what Mbari and Bayo, what Uli Bayer started, Suzanne and Georgina, really sort of epitomized that energy and excitement. And I think sometimes the movement gets a bad rap, as it were, as being Europeans guiding Africans to do something. They certainly didn't see it that way. They saw it as a way to bring forth other artists and other media and so on, dancing, music, not just print media, bead artists, a little bit of everybody. So we were lucky to be there at that time and even luckier to meet these folks. And I was very fortunate to get back in touch with Uli shortly before he died, and had a wonderful correspondence with both he and Georgina. And I should let Sara talk about Ida, but we also were so fortunate to meet him, a traditional artist within the court context of Benin, but also the innovator.
Okay, I'd like to go back a couple steps. I joined the Peace Corps because I was trying to figure out how to get out of America for a while and travel around the world. And so I was visiting Long Beach State, where I had just finished a fine arts degree. And one of my professors said, well, the Peace Corps is recruiting on campus. Why don't you go down and talk to them? So I did, and I filled out their application form just like that and went home. And I thought, I didn't put down where I wanted to go. And I thought, I want to go where they make the Benin bronzes. And, you know, they always say, watch what you pray for because you'll get it. I was so happy when I finally found out where I was stationed. It was in Nigeria, and I was like 60 miles from Benin City at Teacher Training College of Braka. Now, I was just a skinny kid. You know, I was 23 years old when I joined. John Kennedy was president. That dates me. And I was so overjoyed to be that near where the bronzes were made. And I saw in Black Orpheus magazine an article about Ovia Ida. And I asked my students, they were all men, it's a men's college where I was teaching. I said, is anybody from Benin City and do you know Ovia Ida? And so one of my students said, yeah, I'm from Benin, I can introduce you to him. So I went to Benin City with the student, and that started a real friendship. And I was able to visit Benin City a number of times, even to the Igwe Festival, which I think you were there also.
Sure.
So we were colleagues, we knew each other over there. And I had no idea that in the future, I would start a museum studies program, you know, and teach in it all these years. But I traveled around to the museums, of course, in Benin City, in Lagos, in Jos. I went to the Mbari house in Ibadan. Nobody was there. And this tells you what Nigeria was like then. I was able to just wander around, look at the art on display, and I kept saying, hello, is anybody here? Nobody was there, but nobody felt compelled, you know, to be there. There was no security guard or anything. And I thought that was really wonderful. And I also took students to go see craftspeople and things. So I love Nigeria, and I hitchhiked all over the place. It was a wonderful country. And as Phil said, it was really calm and people were happy. And most people that picked up Peace Corps volunteers, you know, to give them rides, just wanted to talk to us.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Well, I wasn't in the Peace Corps, but I certainly found out a lot about it when I went to graduate school. I had done 2 degrees in studio and then realized that I really wasn't a creative artist, that I was more of an academic. So I ended up at Indiana University and studying with Roy Sieber. And it seems that everybody else there in history, anthropology, folklore, art history had all been in the Peace Corps.
Yeah,
And they all came with this excitement.
They had
And that's why they came there. I mean, like one of my friends had been a zoology major, but in the Peace Corps, she was in Sierra Leone. She discovered masquerade and art that had been made. So when she went to graduate school, she went somewhere where they were studying African art. And at that time, Indiana was sort of attracting, they had got Roy Sieber as a art historian. They got Alan Miriam as a
ethnomusicologist.
as ethnomusicologist. James Vaughn was in anthropology, George Brooks in history. So it was just this wonderful thing of interdisciplinarity. I mean, we all had classes together, we all knew each other. I think everybody in my department was jealous of the Africanists because we had such camaraderie around campus. And it was partly because of Peace Corps returnees, but also the fact that in African studies, you study everything about Africa. So we knew each other that way. And that also has to do with the topic we're talking about today, is the interdisciplinary aspect of Mbari, and then Mbari and Bio, and all of the things that happened with Black Orpheus.
Just one thing, maybe, touch on this, Mbari and Bio. And when Uli first started it, he really intended it to be a multi-ethnic issue. He meant the Mbari, these fabulous shrines for Allah, the earth goddess, and Igbo, where Skip Cole wrote about so well. And then the Yoruba of Ashokbo, where he based the first Mbari and Bio house, so they would Yorubize it, as it were. And because Bio means you see it, that will be beautiful.
Mbari mean I came and saw.
Right.
Bio, and I was happy.
Yeah, exactly.
I came and saw, and I was happy.
So anyway, the multi-disciplinary aspect, the multi-ethnic thing there, Indiana, boy, drew me, one, because folklore is a few places I get a PhD, but they had these Peace Corps fellowships, a fabulous $2,000. So for us, that was a fortune, and so on. But boy, music, I did a radio show there. I can't remember his name now, it was somebody in literature as well. And Liebenau,
Emil
Poly-Sci,
Schneider.
yeah.
Oh, right.
So it was that variety that luckily we could participate in. And as Robin says, it rejuvenated all of us.
Right.
And I got the scholarship to study Igbo language. And guess what? When I went to class the first day, Phil was in the class. We both got that scholarship.
Yeah.
My intention was not to study Nigeria or to study Yoruba. I was intent on going to Mali and study Bamana culture. But the day I started graduate school, right next to me, shoulder to shoulder, was another person who was his first day of graduate school, and it was Babatunde Lawal.
Right.
So we went through the program together, and then one time Ekpo Eyo, who had just done, he was the director of the National Department of Antiquities in Nigeria, came to speak about some excavations that he had just done in Owo, Nigeria. So he and Tunde ganged up on me and insisted that I needed to go to Nigeria, I needed to go to Yoruba country, I needed to go to Owo and catch up. Ekpo had just done the antiquities. I needed to see what was happening now. And I'm still doing that. I've just finished the third article this year. The first one would be published in the fall.
Finally.
About sort of a half century look back at what was happening in 1978, 1973, and what's happening in 2023.
Wow.
I am really very excited to hear all these wonderful things about Nigeria in the 1960s and in the 1970s. And like Phil and Robin has just indicated, actually the whole essence of the Mbari workshop of the 60s was to actually create this moment when people kind of converge together. And the meaning of Mbari Bio, well, in the Igbo language, Mbari represented those, adobe or mud adobe house that was built to venerate Allah among the Igbo people. Then when it comes to the Yoruba side, we hear things like Mbari, Mbayo. When I see, I will be happy. Which was the whole idea. So the moment sit perfectly with the air of independence that saturated Nigeria and many other African nations at the time. if we move away a little bit from the 1960s, which was filled with excitement that actually ended in the Nigerian Civil War towards the end of the 1960s, and the 1970s, I believe, presented to us a kind of landscape that was very tricky. I would like to pick Robin's mind in this aspect because he was at Owo. Owo was very close to Benin City, where I grew up eventually after he had left, to kind of help us capture how Nigeria kind of became immediately after the Civil War that ravaged the country.
Well, when I arrived in Nigeria, I first of all went to Abeokuta, I went to Lagos, I went to Ibadan.
When did you go back? What year did you go back? I forgot.
I haven't gone back.
No. When you first,
Oh, it's 1973.
73. Okay.
Yeah. But you were talking about things that happened after the Civil War. The leadership, traditional leadership, became very involved in contemporary politics. And the king of Owo, the Olowo, Olagbegi Olatero, was one of the main political persons in the new Nigeria. And one of the primary political parties was formed in his palace. It turns out that one of his best friends, also in Owo, Jackson, they supported different candidates. So one was for Awolowo, one was for the other one. And it's just a terrible period of time. There were houses that were burned, all sorts of things going on. When I arrived, I saw in the newspapers that chiefs in Owo were being admonished by the military government not to do this, not to do that. So there was sort of a civil war going on in Owo right after the Civil War. This was 1966. The king was deposed, or something was done to him. In 68, he was actually ousted and put into exile, and somebody else was crowned king. So that's what I went into. So that's probably not what you were interested in hearing, but
these are all part of, I think, what our audience ought to be aware of, because we were celebrating the wonderful things that Jacob Lawrence had with these young people had created in the 60s. And then we thought it was going to continuously be smooth sailing all the way. But having all this kind of part of the Nigerian African story is also very vital for us to situate how artistic creativity continued even until today. So you and Phil, you and Sarah talked very eloquently about your time as a Peace Corps volunteer. I know you went back to do research for your degree in folklore.
Yeah.
You went specifically to the Isoko culture, or was it selected for you? And what are the salient cultural aspects of the Isoko people that you think manifested or reflected in the works by this artist of Mbari at that time?
Okay, well, I have many people who pick on me, one being Doran Ross, who was unfortunately passed away recently, always accused me. Every article I published about the Isoko, I put in a Ivri figure. Ivri is a central image for the Isoko, aesthetically, philosophically, militarily, which was chartreuse with a brown cow on top, spotted brown cow, which had been carved for me. And Doran always said, that's the craziest carving I've ever seen. You only publish in African art so you can get that photograph in there. Well, in part, that really does sort of relate to your question. The Isoko were really betwixt and between. They were part of the Midwestern state before the war. They were federal territory, in other words, and not part of Biafra. But culturally, they're really a mix of Edo and Igbo influences, which they have tried to negotiate in their own way, I think. And I'm going to jump back a little bit. Mbari and Bio was not just multi-ethnic, and multicultural, but there were actually artists coming in. Roland Abioto just reminded me of this. There were artists from Mozambique and other places in West Africa, other countries, who came to the Mbari Club. And part of the Mbari Club was not just that Fela used to play there and other famous musicians, but up above was a Lebanese restaurant called the West End. And boy, for Peace Corps, that was one of the best restaurants in the world. And we loved that place. But again, as you say, unfortunately, things were cast asunder. Indeed, Uli left right as that started. He left in '67, went to New Guinea and started a whole other chain of events in New Guinea. He and Georgina, Suzanne Wenger stayed on, totally embedded in the Oshun and Oshogbo activities, not just the school that they had started and the students. And she just passed away only a few years ago. So there was an odd kind of continuity in part. And I think most of the Nigerian artists would see themselves as Nigerian, not just ethnically oriented. I should leave that for you to say.
Right.
I'd like to add something. I was at Indiana working on the doctorate in cultural anthropology and African studies. And after I took all the African studies courses and, you know, all the introductory things, I decided I really didn't want to be an anthropologist. So I wrote a master's thesis, which was about Ovia Ida. It's like a book about him. And then started teaching. Well, when I came to Southern University at New Orleans, they said, well, you know, you've got to go back and get a doctorate. So I started a whole nother doctorate in African-American studies at Atlanta University. And for a while, when Tina Dunkley, the curator, went to the Smithsonian for some study, I was able to be the curator for 6 months of their museum. So I got to see firsthand their huge collection of African-American art. So I finished that doctorate and came back here, and I met Jacob Lawrence several times when he came to New Orleans. And of course, the Amistad Research Center has a lot of his work. But I wanted to say that I am so thrilled to see the work that he painted in Nigeria here, because it brought back a lot of memories. But I think they're some of the best paintings that Jacob Lawrence ever did. And his observation, because Ida's house was right next to where they slaughtered the cattle in Benin City. And to see Jacob Lawrence's painting of one of those,
Meat market.
meat market, but also where they slaughtered them, was just amazing. And to see his pictures of the market and the chickens being so important, and the cattle that the house men would walk down, and at night it would look like a whole bunch of people walking down the highway, being robbed or something, but it was the cattle, those huge antlers on the cattle. So I'm just saying that seeing those paintings really brought back what Nigeria was like.
Right.
Yeah, so I love the way you put that together with Jacob Lawrence and then the artists that we got to know over there. And I teach that. I have a class called Art of the African Diaspora, and we look at contemporary African artists and African-American artists as well. And then this semester I'm teaching topics in African art. And believe me, they're going to see everything about this show, and the local students will come and review the show. But also the students we have in other cities, I'll be sending them a lot of information. So thank you so much. This is such a gift to us here in New Orleans. Really.
This exhibition titled Black Orpheus Jacob Lawrence and the Mbari Club, like I tried, or like we tried to clarify in the introduction of the exhibition, was a way to capture the moment that Jacob Lawrence, just like you young people at the time, visited Nigeria, and how he interpreted or how he translated that visit into visual into his visual kind of platform. But also I want to like a kind of last last reflection about the number of things that I have gleaned from your conversation this morning. As I'll start from Dr. Hollis about Ovia Ida's house close to the abattoir, where it's called the abattoir in Nigeria, and how how things have really transformed. Like I know Ovia Ida's house was kind of pitched just right before the moat, the historical moat that was the kind of earthwork that was built around Benin City to wait off people coming in to attack the kingdom. All those historical or archaeological things that would have continued to project the should I say antiquity or the long existence of Benin City is beginning to go away. It is worrying to a very large extent, but as long as the current leadership think that is the right way to go, a lot of those things are changing. And then the situation of those cattle people carrying cattle around, they in the last few years they have become something like a thorn in many of the people who they come in contact with. I remember when we were younger growing up, we were very happy seeing them just walk past our place. But today there are different kinds of news that kind of tend to pair this cattle people to some kind of very dangerous, really very dangerous episodes where there is even the potential of loss of human life and lives and property. A lot of changes seem to have been going on, and I'm very lucky. I'm very happy that I was able to capture these very interesting moments, because that would have been part of the exhibition we had. Our intention at the time we were working towards this exhibition was to go back to Nigeria and find some of those young people who actually played part. We had penciled down names like Wale Soyinka, who's still alive and lives in Ogun State. And we also penciled down to go see Bruce Onabrakbeya, who still lives at Agbaroto in Delta State of Nigeria. We also thought about Yusuf Grillo, but in the midst of COVID-19, Yusuf Grillo left. And the same thing happened to Georgina Bayo, where we were very actively thinking to go out there to see them and speak with them, but somehow Georgina Bayo also passed. So capturing that moment, I thought, was another component of the exhibition that will show show the extent of that visual and creative celebration at that time in Nigeria. And I am so really very happy that you all could have the time, or kind of was kind enough to kind of give me your time, and we all come here to kind of speak about the show. So on a very last note, I would like for you to just say, tell us how you found the exhibition, if it was placed, or if you spoke correctly about the time or not.
I got to get one historical comment in about you before that, because I think it does bring together so many of these things. One of the things about his house, which is absolutely unique, and we've published on it, I've got an article in African Arts, several actually on him, and he was built into the city wall. Okay, he wanted to build his house as an elephant originally, right. And so well known. The fathers of the commission said, no way you're going to do that. You got to do. So he did sort of a European house. But what I loved was that he said, but inside, it's like the inside of an elephant.
Right, exactly.
Now, the other side of that, I mean, that's just one indication of how special Ida was as a person and an artist. when Uli and Georgina show up, convince him to do what was then called the Olokun Gallery in Benin City as part of the Mbari and Bio cultural movement. He was enthusiastic. He did it, put it in the front of his compound. He also had built a guest house, and that's where my wife, my to-be wife, and I used to stay when we visit Ida. And it had its own characteristics, but Georgina was then painted a mural. And at one point, Ida sort of took me aside, very low voice. What does it mean? What do Georgina's murals mean? Which I thought was a wonderful reversal, because usually it's us asking folks in Nigeria, what does it mean? But anyway, I think that sort of indicates the vibrant exchange that was going on at the time. So,
I'd like to talk about the show.
yeah.
Somehow, when you first told me about it, I was thinking this was going to be Jacob Lawrence and people like Twin 77 and Jimo Baraimo and other people who had been active in Mbari and Bio, and maybe Suzanne Wenger, who was in sort of another movement in the same place. But I was really happy that you had all of these issues of Black Orpheus on display, because all of us had used Black
My
Orpheus.
collection.
It's his
Those are
collection.
all mine.
Oh, those are yours?
Yes.
I didn't realize that.
He
Okay,
gives it.
I was thinking, where did they find all of these? But anyway, we had all used them, and apparently Phil had collected them.
I'll collect
Um,
anything.
So, I mean, you
Yes.
know, to see a whole wall of them and another wall behind them, and to see a Suzanne Wenger print right next to them when her handwork is so obvious on the covers of so many of them. To think about the things that went into Black Orpheus, where Uli Meyer and Wole Sayinka and others involved with the
Right.
journal were pulling together African Americans and Africans of all sorts and Europeans,
Right.
and bringing in people to do workshops for these kids. And yet, that's another thing that sort of, I looked at one of Twin 77's painting and said, I never realized, I thought he was an old guy. And he's 2 years younger than I am, or was 2 years younger than I am. And there's a painting on the wall that he would have been 16 years old when he did. And there's such maturity and excitement and so on in that painting. All of these people, like Jimo Baraimo, is younger than I am. So they were a bunch of kids just coming out of primary school, I think, when Uli and Suzanne, and then Uli and Georgina and Duro Ladipo
Right.
and so on, pulled them together. And
Twins came in as a dancer
yeah.
into the club.
But then also in the exhibition, we moved beyond Mbari and Bio, and then suddenly we see Ethiopians and people from Central Africa, and then African Americans, and that sort of looking at a total world is what that group was doing, pulling them all together.
Oh, yeah.
And you've done that in the exhibition.
Yeah.
I really, really enjoyed it.
And Uli was bringing in artists from all over.
Yeah.
And then the New Guinea work he did for a few years before he sort of retired.
I have to say that between the two of them, they really covered the excitement of the exhibition. You have done a wonderful job with that. And I have to mention the catalog, because I came to the museum and the lady in the shop said, I don't know whether I'm supposed to sell these yet, but I said, look, I have to talk about the show on Wednesday, one of the gallery talks, and I said, I need the catalog. So I literally read through the catalog cover to cover. And I think the essays that you've chosen for it and what you've written, and it really gives a wonderful preview and will give a wonderful after view, because I always tell my students that the catalog for an exhibition is what you have left to show what was the exhibition.
The artifact.
And I think that your catalog is just fabulous. I've told all my students, please go to Noma and buy it, or, if you're not here, write to them and get it. But I think you've done something really, really wonderful with this. And, you know, teaching in the HBCU, I got my doctorate in African American Studies from an HBCU. My son went to one, his wife went to one. So we're definitely an HBCU family, but it's very meaningful. And this is going to open a lot of people's eyes in New Orleans about this track. And I remember once I gave a lecture here when they had the Art of Senegal here. And John Bullard, who I adore, he was our director for years here. He said in the catalog that the show showed the inspiration that African artists has from Picasso. Well, when I gave my lecture,
Sorry.
I spent an hour and a half saying that it was the other way around.
By
It
the
showed
way.
so much African art from all over the continent that came before somebody like Picasso. So this show is very important.
Well, and also Jacob Lawrence was
Sorry.
making moves before back to Africa for African Americans, I think became such a major idea. He was already seen it, and Baker's went over a number of other artists, you know, and
Right.
so that accent, I think, is very important to emphasize.
Yeah.
And that was one of my favorite essays in there about the different ways these different African-American artists and writers looked at going to Africa and what they learned. I'm sorry.
Speaking of the book and museum studies, I too started a museum studies program at University of Florida. But I stopped calling them catalogs because if you look back in the 1960s, a catalog was a list of things and pictures.
Yeah.
Since then, we produce books.
That's true.
So I
That's
think
true.
in the catalog is really a book that accompanies an exhibition.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Yeah.
It is.
You know, I remember that very vividly because in our graduate seminars at the University of Florida, when Robin was the professor, he had impressed that upon us that, you know, what we have now are books. It's no
Right.
longer a
Right.
catalog that used to be a list of.
I just love one more thing
And,
about Ida also reaching across. Cheeky sent me a copy of a letter he found that Ida sent to the Harmon Foundation to get funding.
I didn't know
The
that.
Harmon
Wow.
Foundation, of course, was critical to the Harlem Renaissance
Wow.
and so much more. They're still,
Right.
well, maybe they're not still in existence. So it went both ways,
Yeah.
and we still are finding out things.
And the Harmon Foundation actually sponsored Benny Wong's first show in the United States.
That's right, yeah.
I think in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming.
Well, thank
And
you.
I'm really very glad that you could make it. And we are going to encourage the New Orleans audience and, you know, kind of spread the news around. There's this wonderful exhibition going on at the New Orleans Museum of Art that is a celebration of, you know, artistic creativity in the 1960s. Thank you very much.
Thank you.